Every day, close to 20% of the world's oil moves through a narrow strip of water sitting between Iran and Oman. It's known as the Strait of Hormuz. At its tightest point, this critical energy route squeezes through a passage just 21 miles across. But the actual lanes used by ships are even tighter. It's just 2 miles wide going each way. That slim corridor carries tens of millions of barrels of oil each and every day. Which means one thing. If anything disrupts the Strait of Hormuz, the whole global economy feels the impact almost right away. And recently, rising tensions in the region have reminded the world just how vulnerable this choke point truly is. Warships move through the waters. Insurance costs for oil tankers spike. Shipping companies quietly start drawing up backup plans. Over the past few years, the strait has seen seized tankers, damaged vessels, and direct military standoffs. It is one of the very few spots on Earth where a single wrong move could trigger a much larger conflict. The strait isn't officially shut down, but the mere chance that it could be disrupted is enough to throw global energy markets into a panic. And that panic doesn't stay on trading floors. A disruption here wouldn't just be a geopolitical problem. It would mean higher fuel costs, rising shipping prices, and more expensive products on store shelves, felt from New York all the way to Tokyo. Which brings up a fascinating question. What if ships didn't need to pass through the Strait of Hormuz at all? For decades, engineers and strategists have talked about a bold idea. A large canal cut straight through the mountains of Oman's Musandam Peninsula, letting ships skip the strait completely. On paper, it sounds like the perfect fix. But reality has a way of making straightforward ideas far more complicated. To understand the canal concept, you first need to understand the geography. The Persian Gulf is home to some of the biggest oil-producing nations on Earth: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. Nearly every tanker leaving these countries has to pass through one single exit: the Strait of Hormuz. Around 20 million barrels of oil travel through this passage every day. That's roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed across the globe. Very few places on Earth carry this kind of economic weight. And unlike many other trade routes, there are almost no real alternatives. Some nations have tried to cut their reliance on the strait. Saudi Arabia constructed pipelines that move oil across the Arabian Peninsula to ports on the Red Sea. The UAE built a pipeline connecting its oil fields directly to the port of Fujairah, which sits outside the Strait of Hormuz. But even together, these pipelines can only carry a small portion of the oil that normally travels by tanker. For the rest of the world's energy needs, ships are still essential, which means the global economy continues to rely on this tight gateway. And that dependency makes engineers very uneasy, because choke points concentrate risk. And few choke points on Earth are as sensitive as this one. Now, look at the map again. At the northern edge of Oman sits a rough piece of land called the Musandam Peninsula. It pushes out into the Strait of Hormuz like a jagged wall of mountains. But here's the interesting part. In several spots, the distance between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is surprisingly small. Only a few dozen miles of land separate the two bodies of water, which leads to an obvious idea. Why not dig a canal right through the peninsula? Ships leaving the Persian Gulf could skip the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Instead of sailing through a narrow geopolitical choke point, tankers could head straight out into the open ocean. A brilliant idea. On a flat map, the terrain tells a very different story. The Musandam Peninsula is not flat desert. It's part of the Hajar Mountains, one of the roughest landscapes in the entire Middle East. Sharp. Limestone peaks rise steeply from the coastline. Some mountains in this area reach over 2,000 meters above sea level. That's more than 6,500 feet. Building a canal here wouldn't mean moving sand. It would mean cutting straight through entire mountains. And the canal would have to be massive. Modern oil tankers, known as Very Large Crude Carriers, or VLCCs, are among the biggest ships ever constructed. To handle them safely, a canal would need to be deep, wide, and solid enough for ships hundreds of meters in length. The digging required would be extraordinary. Millions upon millions of tons of rock would need to be blasted, cut, and cleared away. Entire mountain ridges would have to be completely reshaped. The environmental damage alone would be massive, and the cost, possibly hundreds of billions of dollars. To put that in perspective, even the large-scale Panama Canal expansion cost around $5 billion. A Musandam canal could be many times larger than that, but engineering is only half the challenge. Even if the technical problems could somehow be overcome, another obstacle shows up right away: politics. The Musandam Peninsula belongs to Oman, and as of today, there is no official plan to build any canal here. Oman's development plans for the region are centered on tourism, ports, and regional infrastructure, not cutting a shipping corridor through its mountains. A project this big would require remarkable international cooperation. Regional governments would need to back it, investors would need to fund it, and long-term security agreements would need to protect it. Because there is another uncomfortable reality. A canal wouldn't remove the vulnerability. It would just shift the choke point somewhere else, instead of the Strait of Hormuz. Global oil flows would depend on one single man-made canal. Like any canal, it could still be blocked. A grounded tanker, a targeted attack, or even a natural disaster. Any one of these could shut the route down overnight. The global economy would simply swap one bottleneck for another. So if the Musandam Canal is so difficult to build, why does the idea keep coming back? Because it points to something deeper about how the modern world actually functions. Global trade runs on geography: a narrow canal in Egypt, straight between rival nations. A handful of shipping corridors quietly keeping the world economy in motion. For centuries, these natural choke points have shaped the movement of energy, goods, and power across the planet. The Musandam Canal represents a dream. It's a chance to reshape geography itself, to eliminate one of the world's most fragile bottlenecks. But reality doesn't bend easily. Mountains are hard to move. Politics is even harder. For now, the Strait of Hormuz stays exactly what it has always been. It's one of the most important and most exposed energy corridors on Earth. And as long as the world keeps depending on it, the idea of a canal through Musandam will keep capturing the minds of engineers, strategists, and anyone wondering just how breakable our global trade system truly is.